With that, we move on to the third sub-theme, which is India's land and maritime neighbours. For this session, under the chairmanship of Commodore R.S. Vasan, we will be joined by the following esteemed and expert speakers: Dr. Bidanda M. Chengappa, Associate Professor, Christ University, Bangalore, and Mr. P. M. Heblikar, Managing Trustee, Institute of Contemporary Studies, Bangalore. Mr. Chengappa will be presenting on China-Pakistan equation and India's border security, and Mr. Heblikar will be presenting on China's Myanmar and Bangladesh policy and India's border security. I now invite the chair for the session, Commodore Vasan, to introduce the distinguished speakers and commence the presentations. Thank you.
Introduction is there in the folder.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, sir, for that. The invitations, I would like to try and say one time so that there is more question answers, etc. I don't have to introduce either of you. You are well known and you are very familiar with PII and Chennai. So may I request you both to kindly come here, and both experts from Bangalore who are here with us. And first, of course, will be Dr. Chengappa, and you may kindly take over without further introductions or of the topic so that we save time. All yours.
Can you put on the PPT? Yeah. My topic is on. I'm sure there's a lot of conference fatigue at this point in time, so I'll keep it short and sweet. Everyone, there has to be a last speaker or second last speaker, and it is my lot or my luck to be the second last speaker. So basically, China-Pakistan relations, I'll try and make you literate on China-Pakistan relations in the next 15 minutes, not more than that. I won't even take 20 minutes. China-Pakistan relation, yeah, it basically involves geography, history, economy, military, and ideology. Ideology may be very confusing, but idea is to confuse you a little as much as communicate. So what has happened is the China's quest for supremacy in Asia is what drives the Beijing-Islamabad relationship in order to contain India. And basically the whole relationship becomes a triangular relationship simply because of Pakistan occupied Jammu and Kashmir. And more recently, the United States withdrawal from Afghanistan as of 2021 again enhances China's interest in Pakistan. So this will give you a quick understanding of the China-Pakistan-India, the triangular relationship. Okay. So basically, there's a quest for mutual coexistence between India and Pakistan, and then there's a power imbalance all over the place, and then China's strategic opportunism. Okay. Yeah. So next slide. Yeah, this is not what I have said, but what the late Chief of Defence Staff Bipin Rawat said, and then the Chief of Army Staff at that point in time, General Narawane, said. So this is self-evident. It will take you 60 seconds or maybe 90 seconds to read it. The whole thing is that after the yeah, anyway, just read this. Yeah, can we change to the next slide? Yeah, now the origins of the China-Pakistan relationship is here. But what is not here, and what is something which is a product of my research, is the coal for cotton agreement between India and Pakistan as of 1960, wherein India was supposed to give Pakistan coal and Pakistan was supposed to reciprocate with cotton. Now that did not happen. India at some point, some smart bureaucrat in New Delhi thought, let us stop the coal export to Pakistan to punish Pakistan. And in the process, Pakistan turned to China. So this is a very crucial point which I have not mentioned here, but I'm verbally conveying it. It's something worth some level of research. The coal for cotton agreement between India and Pakistan, which failed and drove Pakistan into China's arms. Okay. Next slide, please. Yeah, like I said, this relationship is all about geography. Geography comes before history. So this is a geography that which makes it very self-evident. Without this geography, the China-Pakistan relationship would not happen. This is all there. You get all this on the internet if you're a little more tech savvy. Yeah, this is one more thing to drive home the point about geography. I already mentioned the coal for cotton agreement between India and China and Pakistan, which is the economy factor element of the relationship. Okay, so this brings a military dimension to the relationship. We'll see it in the next couple of slides. Okay. Next, please. Yeah, now what are Pakistan's compulsions? Like I said, quest for supremacy in Asia. The peer competitors to China in Asia are Vietnam, India, and Japan. And therefore, the Pakistani compulsions. But all the Pakistani compulsions apart, I must tell you about a track to diplomacy I was involved with in Sri Lanka soon after Kargil in 1999. It was a nice, happy evening, 6:30 or 7:30 in the evening, cocktails on in some fancy five-star. And suddenly behind me, there were two Chinese professors. They were masquerading as professors or what, I don't know, but they claimed to be Chinese professors. One of the professors, he was not even formally introduced to me. He tapped me on my back and he said, "Do you know why China is friendly with Pakistan?" He said, "China is friendly with Pakistan only to counterbalance India." So that explains the level of Chinese compulsions to balance India. Okay. Yeah, next slide. So those are Pakistani compulsions. Yeah. Now, as of when, which is the date? May 2021. In Gilgit-Baltistan, again, I am highlighting Gilgit-Baltistan. There were Chinese PLA instructors training Pak army in mountain warfare. Now, I don't know how much expertise China has in mountain warfare, but mountain warfare is, I think Pakistan has more expertise in mountain warfare. But anyway, that's debatable. The point I'm trying to drive home is simply that Gilgit-Baltistan is what I'm highlighting, simply because in mountain warfare, the principle is you train where you fight and not as you fight. And mountains are all about high altitudes, terrain, and gradients. And mountains, by their very nature, tend to favor the defender rather than the offensive force. And mountains are known to eat up troops. So the Chinese, as General Narawane was mentioning over lunch, they have about 40% of their army is conscript army. So what is their level of expertise in mountain warfare vis-a-vis India? India has got its own level of expertise in mountain warfare. But the fact that PLA and Chinese troops were, PLA were doing joint training suggests some level of threat for the Indian side. Okay. And then there's a couple of more things. According to Chris Osborne, who's the defense editor for National Interest magazine, he says the Chinese PLA has developed self-propelled mortars mounted on four-wheeled assault vehicles, which are off-the-road vehicles. And that indicates a possibility of mountain warfare in the plateau regions for India. NATO armies at the next level are experimenting with electric bicycles for mountain warfare. So the mechanization of mountain warfare, to what extent that is possible. Then the other aspect of mountain warfare and the threat to the Indian side, Indian border security, as the topic of the lecture presentation has to do with Chinese PLA doing parachute training in Tibet. Now, parachute training in Tibet is different because the air in Tibet is thinner, so the acceleration rate of the parachute is faster. So therefore, it is parachute operations under special conditions. So yeah, we move on to the next slide. Yeah, then there is the China-Pakistan military technology ties. I mean, apart from all these statistics, that aircraft with that kind of idli on top of it, that idli looking thing is the AWACS, Airborne Warning and Control Systems. So this is the eye in the sky, where it will give the Chinese side or the Pakistan. This is a Karakoram Eagle, this aircraft. It's on a Chinese platform, aerial platform, and it's got a AESA radar, active electronically scanned array radar, which is state of the art. That will really give the Pakistani Air Force, which is numerically much inferior to the Indian Air Force, a very different kind of game changer experience. Pakistan has already got about 3 AWACS, it's got one from Sweden, one from France, and somebody said Israeli technology. I find that difficult to believe. But anyway, this is the Chinese technology. So this is something that can be a game changer and actually threaten India's border security in a big, big way. So this is the major issue about military technology ties between China and Pakistan that I'd like to flag. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, this is the China-Pak economic corridor. Basically, this economic corridor aims to enhance connectivity, as everybody knows. I'm not saying anything new. And it otherwise affects India's historical claims to Pak-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Now, what does this mean basically? This means that the connectivity, there will be military, as somebody said, it is a, what is it? Infrastructure techno-political regime. I found that phrase very catchy. It's a Chinese infrastructure political regime. And basically, China will be all over India's northern, western, and eastern borders. That is the military implication of this business. Next slide, please. Next slide is again. Yeah. Now, what will happen here? Yeah, 10 minutes. Yeah, fine. So now there's the when the Galwan clashes were happening in May 2020, it's not a mere coincidence that Pakistan had deployed 20,000 troops in the area. Now that is the worrisome part. Whether there'll be a two-front war, I don't know. But see, I forgot to mention some caveat at the beginning. Whatever presentation I'm making on China and Pakistan, you have to bear foremost and uppermost in your mind is that the economy of Pakistan and the economy of China are in bad shape. So the economies of both the countries are in bad shape. They're obviously going to be inward looking and not outwardly focused. That's the key point to bear in mind as of 2023. If and when the economies will pick up and improve later, that's a question of speculation. So basically, the linking of Gwadar port to the southern Xinjiang is the question. Anyway, joint action. Next slide. Yeah, this is the proposed road to link, southern the railway line, the Punjab Railway to southern Xinjiang. So I'm trying to impress upon you how geography plays more of a role than in the strategy between China and Pakistan. Next slide, please. Yeah, these are the recommendations that I've tried to make. Just spend a minute on that and how well developed are our border villages? Mr. Claude RP just showed us the development level of Chinese border villages on the other side of the LAC. Indian border villages don't boast a similar claim. Basically, the vigil on the border has got to be very, very strong. And when I say integrate border security management, there was I think recently or some time back, there was a little problem, not a problem, but command and control between the Indian Army and the Indo-Tibetan Border Police, who would manage that stretch of the border. So these are things, as you know, the Indo-Tibetan Border Police is under the Home Ministry, the Indian Army is under the Defense Ministry. How do you have this? How do you manage these border management issues? And then border fence with China, Myanmar, and Bhutan. That's another, whether that project is feasible or not. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, thanks. I forgot. Yeah, the major threat to our border security will be, like I've listed here, availability of the Skardu Pakistan Air Force base to China in the future. And if that happens, that will be a very bad scene. Yeah. These are the recommendations. I'll just make my conclusion in 1 minute and conclude. Can you go to the last conclusion slide? It's an empty slide. Yeah. The conclusion slide is that given the economy of both countries, right now nothing is going to happen in the short term, but gradually in the long term, the possibility of a two-front war cannot be wished away. But more realistically, I'll stop with this statement, is simply that China may not directly engage India militarily, but will only inspire Pakistan to do so. And on that note, I will conclude. Thank you, the organizers, everybody.
Thank you, Professor Shangappa. I know there are a lot of things that perhaps some of the audience did not know, particularly about this coal-cotton war that was perhaps the start of this standoff between us. A lot of things that, as they say, plenty of water has flown, in this before we came to this stage. The point is that China is obviously using, like the person who came and tapped your shoulder and said, why are we dealing with Pakistan? These are real intentions that are there. We should understand as to what their policies are. They are looking at the two-front war. China is also looking at a two-front war. They're looking at Taiwan on one side in the maritime domain and LAC with Himalaya. So, the challenges are similar. But in our case, I think the defense forces and the entire machinery is geared up to fighting a two-front war. We exercised this on many occasions by redeploying aircraft, squadrons, platoons, etc. So this is an ongoing competition for preparedness. That's something will keep us busy, keep all the three nations busy. Thank you. I'm sure there'll be many questions for you. May I now invite the last speaker, Mr. Pratap Reblika, who will not disappoint you because the amount of knowledge that is, he can speak for hours on this. He's been there, he's done that, he's seen that. Therefore, welcome, Mr. Pratapji, all yours.
Thank you, sir. Commodore Vasan, ladies and gentlemen, my task has been made simpler by my predecessors today. They have covered most of the aspects I had in mind. But having prepared the presentation, I think I will go through it. It is not going to be a torturous journey, but a simple one. I'll try and stick to the facts, some of which is not available. Otherwise, having served in Myanmar, having covered this area for the last 25 years of my career, I think I can give you a bird's eye view of what has happened. Go to the next one, please. Burma and Myanmar has always been a foreign policy dilemma for China, for India, Bangladesh, Thailand, and Laos. If you go back to the period 1948, when Burma achieved its independence, it had several problems with its neighbors, especially its eastern neighbor in Thailand, because of familial and other territorial problems they had prior to the independence. So this being the background, we need to understand that since Burma or Myanmar attained independence in 1948, that its journey has been mostly led by the military for over 60 years of its 77 years of independence. I will zigzag through some of the developments in Burma's history. In 1990, Burma came under international sanctions following brutal crackdown on pro-democracy elements and non-implementations of the 1990 parliamentary elections. You will recall in the period 1988-1990 was when pro-democracy elements had the upper hand. Aung San Suu Kyi made a statement on the steps of the famous Shwedavan Pagoda in May 1988. She said that we will fight for our rights, we will fight to restore democracy in this country, and we want to get rid of the military democracy. It took her 5 minutes to bring down Nevin's government, who had ruled Burma single-handedly without elections for 26 years. Aung San Suu Kyi, by no stretch of imagination, was a politician. She was not a freedom fighter. She was the daughter of illustrious parents. Her father, of course, Aung San, was there at the inauguration of Burma's independence. So at that point of time, She, having made this statement, got the collapse of the Navy government done. The military took power, and for 1.5 years, there were battles on the streets of Rangoon and other districts for nearly 1.5 years, till the State Law and Order Restoration Committee took power and established full military rule, suspended the constitution, the 1973 constitution, and ruled by force. So 1990 is a very important year in our consideration of Chinese advent in Myanmar. As the battle for gaining control of Myanmar was progressing from 1988 to 89, the military sent a delegation to China in October 1989 to plead with the Chinese to help them overcome the difficulties created by the international sanctions. If China had not come down to help Myanmar at its time of need, we would have probably have seen a bigger tragedy in our neighborhood. So when Senior General Tan Shui went to China in that time, he came back with promises of $1 billion+ worth of military equipment and some economic aid. But the fact to note here is when the Chinese gave him this aid, they also had infrastructure projects in mind. My colleague Ranade had always tell me, he says, Pat, if China is coming to our next country with an infrastructure project in its hand, please be assured that it will continue to remain there for years and decades to come. So in 1989 December, China made these commitments. It's now what, 34, 35 years, China continues to be part and parcel of Myanmar's infrastructure projects. So China has seized the initiative caused by Western sanctions on a hapless military government in Burma, and it continues to wield larger influence. And China had a policy that was looking at opening up China to get access to the Indian Ocean. China had 5 such kind of projects. 2 were to come through Southeast Asia. One, what is called as the Singapore-Iran rail link, and the other one was the shortcut through Myanmar, as we call it, the Irrawaddy shortcut. I don't want to call it any other thing, because I don't want to give any credence to what the Chinese are doing. I think both Commodore Vasan and I agree that it cannot be called as the China-Myanmar Economic Corridor. In 1985-86, a former Vice Minister of Communication in China wrote an article as to why 160 million population of the southern China were among the poorest. And he called upon the government to initiate measures where they could bring in more of economic development. And these 3 provinces, including Yunnan, are landlocked. The only access to sea was through Myanmar. So they decided that they will create conditions to go through Myanmar to the Bay of Bengal. What did the Chinese do? The Chinese ensured that the Communist Party of Burma withdrew from those areas of its influence along the Sino-Myanmar border, because a large number of elements of the Burma Chinese Communist Party were very, very active in that part of it. So the Chinese retired the leadership of the Burma Communist Party, and they also brought about the dispersal of the armed elements of the Burma Communist Party, so that they could create conditions good for the Burmese government to interact with the local population. Right from 1990 to 1998, the Burmese intelligence services brought 16 armed groups to the table, what is known as swapping arms for peace, so that China created this particular situation for its own benefit, so that it could create the conditions for the route to be operationalized. At that point of time, China envisaged that once it created this route, it need not transit through the South China Sea through the Malacca Straits. And it feared at the time well, things became difficult, but China would be in a um, very sorry state of affairs. So they thought that coming through Burma would give them the kind of insurance against any Western introduction of their efforts. So right from 1990 to 2010, China had extraordinary influence over the developments in Burma. It had invested over $18 billion at the point of time in putting up its infrastructure project, which consists of railway lines, roads, airports, coastal shipping, ocean-going shipping, all keeping its own requirements. My next, please. So when I talked about 1990 to 2010, that was the time when China had its voice heard in all areas of Burmese leadership. But in the period, just go to the next slide. China has been one of the major reasons for a substantial change in the leadership in Myanmar at that point of time. In the year 2004, certain middle-level military officers and senior officers were trying to impress upon the leadership that it needed to review its China policy because they found that Chinese influence had become deeply entrenched. A moment, okay. I'm not even beginning that, right? Okay, so since we have constraints of time, to cut to the quick, contrary to public perception, China's influence in Myanmar is not what we have seen today. There's a lot of resistance to what the Chinese want to do. Now, even in fact, the Chinese are apprehensive that the Quad and other such international developments will impinge on China's influence not only in Myanmar, Bangladesh, as well as in the Bay of Bengal region, moving down to the Indo-Pacific. So the Burmese have not given the Chinese the leeway they wanted. Secondly, because of the typical conditions that exist in Burma today, in Myanmar today, on account of the civil war, the Chinese projects are more or less coming to a level where they're nearly stagnating. That's why you find that the Chinese government has not only begun negotiations with the four major armed groups, through which the Irrawaddy shortcut proceeds to come to some agreement with them, but nobody is agreed. So Chinese influence in Myanmar is not that like we find in Sri Lanka or some other country. The Burmese will just not listen to them. But the Burmese take the Chinese as to be their insurance. I think as we move along, we'll find that we have had the same issues with China in Bangladesh as well. You will all remember right from the time when Bangladesh applied for UN membership, China was the one who continued to oppose it, despite the fact that the international community was in its favor. It's only in 1996 that Bangladesh got its membership of the UN. At that point of time, in 1975 onwards, when Bangladesh had multiple coups which brought Ziaur Rahman into office, it was a time when he opened up the market economy of Bangladesh. The Chinese made substantial. Can you go to the second last slide? There is a rift in Sino-Bangladesh relationship because the Bangladeshis also have come to a conclusion that China has become overbearing. It is trying to show them the fact that they want to invest in Bangladesh because a country like Bangladesh is unable to accept the kind of bounty which China wants to give. Even Xi Jinping, when he visited in 2016, was the first president to visit Bangladesh in 3 decades. and they signed a lot of agreements. But today, Bangladesh finds that it is unable to understand, that unable to be a part of China's strategic plans for the Bay of Bengal or for the Indo-Pacific region. I think this is an area which we need to watch because of the new equations that are developing. China is looking at how Bangladesh, India, Japan on one side, Bangladesh is being wooed and courted by the Quad, and thirdly, India, Japan are trying to build new areas of strategic relationship along their coastline. So in the next 6 to 8 months till elections are over in Bangladesh, we will see a different political drama being played out. But if should Sheikh Hasina return to power, which China also wants, which India also desires, we will probably find that she will be much more aligned to the India-US alliance rather than trying to go along with the Chinese. But she is unlikely to divorce the Chinese from Bangladesh politics because she requires Chinese investments. I have been told to talk about border security, India and Bangladesh. Ladies and gentlemen, all we have to believe is that between 1990 and 2010, India had some tough border problems with Myanmar. Between 1975 and 2006, Bangladesh continued to be a major source of irritation for us because of the kind of anti-India governments we had at that point of time. Bangladesh became a party, along with Pakistan, to export insurgency and terrorism to India. It created problems to destabilize us in the northeast. While in Myanmar, the military allowed the Pakistanis and the others to continue to use their sanctuaries for operations against India. But yes, the government of India has been cognizant, and one of the reasons why India has been cooperating with both Rangoon and Dhaka is to ensure that we have their cooperation in controlling, having their cooperation in ensuring the safety and security of our border areas. I think with these few words, I will stop. I think in the next 1.5 years, we'll probably see much more happening on the Indo-BD and Indo-Myanmar relationship. Thank you.
Another excellent presentation on this, because he's been there, he's out in those areas, he's seen those areas, he's looked at the borders, he's been monitoring this for decades. So these kind of inputs are rare to get. And I'm sure there'll be some more questions on how are we managing our relations in Myanmar and in Bangladesh, etc. So the floor is now open for questions. Please can follow this format. Now the people here will ask first, and then the people in the virtual format. So floor is open now. Please identify yourself and ask your question. Keep them brief.
Yeah.
Please. I'm sure it's not for Professor.
No. It's alarming to note that Myanmar is also supporting insurgents and terrorism in India. Is it still happening, or are they still actively doing that to destabilize the northeast?
In the period between 1990 and 2010, there had been a marked difference between India and Myanmar on many issues. Because in 1988 to 1990, India was one of the countries which were at the forefront to promote democracy in Myanmar, in Burma, to which the Burmese did not take too kindly. So that was a time when more or less the door was closed on bilateral relations. But the Burmese did not do anything to control or contain insurgency on our frontiers. Because I remember in 1956, when the Nagas went to China to meet with the Communist Party of China, they went through Burma. But at that point of time, the Burmese control only extended to Rangoon. So we can say that they could not interdict them. But in 1990 to 2010, I think that was a conscious policy of the Burmese to close their eyes to whatever the Indian insurgents did or sought sanctuaries on their side of the border. There have been spasmodic times when cooperation was extended, but in 2017, when India carried out the first cross-border raids into Myanmar, they sent a lesson that, listen, you do it again, we'll come back again and again. Like happened in Pakistan twice, so the message has gone on to people in the northeast that we will sort you out as and when it's required.
Good evening, sir. My name is Dhanesh Sankhan. I'm from Guru Nanak College pursuing BA Defense and Strategic Studies. My question is regarding the current situation in Manipur. The Kuki insurgents, they come from Myanmar too, and during the 1999, the Act, the Look East policy, it stated that they would create a trilateral highway up to Thailand. So do you think that this highway would lead even more factions entering Manipur or few other areas of Northeast in creating trouble in the Union of India?
The developments in Manipur need to be seen in the context of what's happening between the two major tribals, okay? And what has happened was a result of the decision of the Manipur bench of the Assam High Court asking the government of Manipur to take up an examination of the demand to declare Meiteis as a scheduled tribe. And it set a certain time period for it to be achieved. It also directed the state government and the union government to come together to find a solution. If you look at the past history, even during the 1988 crackdown, most of the Chins went to Mizoram, right? They did not come to Manipur. The largest body of refugees from Burma in 88 came to Mizoram. The same thing has happened now. There are 40,000 odd refugees from contiguous areas across Mizoram who are Kukis, who are Mizos. Kukis and Mizos are from the same stock. The Mizos have accepted them with open arms. As far as Manipur is concerned, because of the issues, there are no great number of Meiteis across the border. But they don't want Kukis to come to Manipur for shelter. That is why you find a smaller number of Kukis being given shelter by the state government. To answer your question, the foreign minister has made a statement just over a few weeks ago that he has discussed with his Burmese counterpart how to reinvigorate the trilateral highway. So once, these are all the kind of equations the government of India and the government of Myanmar share, because there is something that is needed to be done, and this trilateral highway has a great strategic value for us. What I spoke to you about 5 minutes ago was looking at China's Look South policy. Now India's Look East policy or Act East policy is going to complicate the Chinese designs. That is why even most of the countries, Bangladesh has a Look East policy, Thailand has a Look South policy. Most of these policies are looking at how to come together, look at counterbalance what China is doing.
Thank you, sir. Any urgent questions?
Three questions.
Yeah, please read them out and say who is addressed to.
Yes, sir. So we are moving on to virtual Q&A session. So I would first like to take questions from the students. We have one question from the School of International Cooperation, Security and Strategic Languages, RRU. So the students ask, as our development projects in neighboring countries gets delayed time to time, is it a reason why government in our neighboring countries are unable to trust India? If so, what should be our approach? I think this question can be taken by both our speakers.
I suppose from what I understand, the bureaucracy, I remember the Taiwanese trade rep in Delhi, when I had organized a conference between Taiwan and India at the Bangalore University. That gentleman was extremely frustrated at the Indian bureaucracy and its progress. So this is a very worrisome point. There is no single window clearance, and India is not perceived as a necessarily investor friendly destination. Now, that is part of our Indian DNA. How to cope with it is another question. I remember there was a seminar on China in NIAS many years ago, which Mr. Heblikar was involved in. And there was the president of Confederation of Indian Industry. And he had opened a unit in Shanghai and he had opened a unit in Sonepat, in the manufacturing unit. And the difference between the two units and the process of going about was an extremely different experience. I will stop with that and my respected colleague Mr. Heblikar will add on.
Yeah, I also want to bring a different perspective to what Dr. Chankappa has brought to the fore. Public criticism of the government is legitimate. But when you talk about projects in neighboring countries, we also have to bear in mind that there are certain limitations that are imposed upon us. For example, you look at Sri Lanka in the post 2009 period, the number of projects the government of India have launched runs into more than $2 billion. And how did this happen? Because there was political will and there was a way that we could move ahead. Even Sri Lanka wanted us to help them out. Same thing is happening in Bangladesh as well. Basically, I think laying the blame at the feet of the government is one thing. There are other stakeholders in bilateral relations. There is the private sector, the corporate sector. They also need to step up to the plate and to see how best you can help the government of India in fulfilling its obligations. Unlike in China, where there is one government which has a fiat, which decrees has to be done in a particular period of time, it is not so in India, it takes time. Even if India were to sanction $2 billion tomorrow as a line of credit, we at least take 6 to 8 months before we are able to get a project report, a DPR. The DPR goes to the government, it goes to the Exim Bank, which is the authority which disperses the amount. But unlike in the past, the Ministry of External Affairs today has its own powers to sanction projects. Earlier on, the projects used to go to the Finance Ministry and would get turned on for any number of reasons. But today, the delay in getting the proposals and the execution of the project has become qualitatively or marginally faster and better. I don't think we need to really feel awkward about it, but yes, I think it is a new division. There are 3 divisions in the ministry that are dealing with this subject, and in most of the cases, it is something like the whole of the government approach rather than one ministry's approach.
No, I think both the points Walter brought out are extremely valid, but what we are looking at here, sitting in Chennai, in terms of the investment flow into the country, has been phenomenal. If you look at the last 3-4 years, obviously there's a lot of reinventing the wheel, if you want to call it, but to streamline the processes of investment, it's gone up. The same thing I won't say is happening when you are investing somewhere else. That's a point that was valid in the terms of how our projects which are executed, whether it's in Sri Lanka or elsewhere, are coming under strain because of many factors, including delaying tactics applied by the host country because they want to favor China over India. So these are something that we should be conscious of. Yet, I think by and large, the scene is very encouraging as of now, as Shri Pratapji brought out. But there's a lot more that we can do that we must acknowledge and accept. You wanted to add something?
I want to ask you specifically.
Oh, yes.
Not Mr. Hamliker, specifically not Mr. Hamliker. How do you see the frequent, because we talk about land and maritime neighbours, how do you see the frequent calling of Chinese vessels on Sri Lankan shores and India's response and Sri Lankan dynamics between India and Sri Lanka on that specific issue of Chinese vessels calling on?
Yeah, there are 2-3 ways in which you can look at the calling on of these vessels in Sri Lanka. One is on legal terms, in terms of the UNCLOS and in terms of the obligations of a state to support a vessel that comes in at any time. It could be an Indian warship going to China, it could be a Chinese warship coming into Sri Lanka, it's legally allowed. And the port which is there is required to extend facilities for logistics, unless it's on a war mission. The doubts that were expressed in the case of the YW5 which came in was because it had telemetry equipment, it has various spying equipment, and all this is something that intrudes into our security consciousness, which is the reason why we objected to that coming in. Also, within the exclusive economic zone of any country, not just India, up to 200 nautical miles, you have to declare your intention to carry out any kind of research. And also there is a procedure by which the Navy, the police, the research R&D organizations are to step on board that vessel in case they are in the exclusive economic zone and to monitor what is being researched. Are they towing sonars? Are they collecting bathymetric data? These are things which is stringent and it's separate. So in this case, if it is an overlapping area of exclusive economic zone between India and Sri Lanka, how much can you implement? So this is where there was serious concerns. As far as pure visits for rest and recreation, what Navy calls R&R, there are no restrictions. They can come anytime, we can go anywhere as long as it is announced prior to this. So the specific to your question of increased engagement of Chinese vessels in our area, it is a matter of concern because they are not coming here for just rest and recreation. They are using phenomenal amount of sensor to gather data. The bathymetric data is important for designing your sonars, your weapon systems, right? So this is the concern. Even the anti-piracy missions that they spoke about, to date, when you count the number of missions, there are about 356 missions that they have taken in that area since 2009. So what were they doing there? So they're going up and down, they're collecting data, they're looking at the traffic pattern, they're looking at air pattern, because all this is fed into your databases. That is the area of concern as far as we are concerned in terms of this. Not that we are unduly worried. This morning you are not here. So what is brought out in one of the presentation was that it would be foolhardy for China to invest in a naval base in Hambantota. Because the army can strike it, the navy can strike it, the air force can strike it, sitting from here from Tanjavur, Tiruchi, Madurai, wherever. So it's not a concern in terms of they developing a naval base here or a military base. If they do develop a military base, then it has to come with a complete thing to an ecosystem to have defenses built around that, SAMs, this, that, etc. So it's something not going to work out. But coming back to your basic questions of increased activity, yes, it's an issue of concern. Their submarines are coming in larger numbers, the nuclear submarines. And what is the good news? Good news is we are able to track every one of them. So you have the ability to track them and record the sensitive data that they have, and that also goes into the data. All the navies do it, including my good friend here from Russia. He also does it, and we also do it.
So it even Stevens.
Sorry?
Someone even Stevens out or?
Yeah, no, in the sense that we make our concerns known. We have a relationship, so just make our concerns known. And I think we are doing a fairly good job of it. We don't call it arm-twisting.
Just a follow-up. Mr. Abhinav, do you think these concerns are taken seriously? Sorry? The concerns are being taken seriously?
You have to speak into the mic.
You think the concerns are addressed seriously?
Even last year when the vessel came, a commitment had been made by the previous government. And when the government changed, and we discussed this with the Sri Lankans, they apparently have given the government of India a rundown of how the decisions are arrived at. The second thing is, even now when they had this vessel, there are going to be more such vessels coming in, is what Commodore says. And I think we also need to develop a sense of maturity. If you can't, it is the sovereign right of Sri Lanka to accept or to reject vessels coming. And Sri Lanka, I think, is now quite confident that it can deal with this. It is also cognizant of the kind of issues that are being created here. Many years ago, there were a lot number of media reports on MiG aircraft, MiG-19, which were falling off. When an inquiry was done, it was found that some of the information came from foreign missions. It was just to keep that issue burning so that the government of the day would be embarrassed. Now, there is nothing here that we need to feel shy that if a vessel comes, like what Commodore Wasson said, they are going to come for their whatever test they carry on, they'll come and go. And I think this is also to test us how much we are going to. I think that.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add one detail to that. I remember the first time was August 1994. You were with the Coast Guard, isn't it, Commodore? Okay. 1994, August 1994, a Chinese fishing vessel had come to the A&N Islands, and it was apprehended by the Coast Guard, and it was found to carry electronic spying equipment on board. Okay? Just a matter of detail. Thank you.
But you know the incident in Sri Lanka, you and I were together, that 106 millimeter gun which was placed near Trinco Harbour, and the kind of tamasha which the media did, and ultimately Yashwant Sinha was the foreign minister. You covered that meeting. He said, what is the problem? This can be taken out by the Sri Lankan army, by the Navy and Air Force. The whole thing was being brought up.
Two more questions. So there are two more questions. So please ask.
Sorry to take their time.
So let them finish and talk.
Coming back to our online participants, really sorry. I'll be taking the question by Mr. Atreya sir. It's directed to Mr. Heglikar. His question is, as for Aung San Suu Kyi, is that not a manifestation of the tendency for political dynasty started by the so-called freedom fighters as noticed in all of South Asia?
Is there one more question? Please read out both the questions.
Yes, sir. The next question is from Mr. Bala Subramanian. He asks, there is a lot of Chinese interest in Teesta River dredging project and indications that Bangladesh is allowing this. How do you see this and its impact on India's security? Thank you.
First, let me address my friend Rishi Atreya's problems with what he says dynastic influences in Myanmar. Rishi, I can assure you that the Aung San Suu Kyi dynastic influence will perhaps stop with her, because neither of her two sons is interested in politics, and her husband died in 1997. So, to be fair, I think the lady has made great sacrifice on behalf of her democracy and her party, and that has, right from the time she came back to Myanmar, except for the few visits she went overseas as a state councillor, and I think her sacrifices are noteworthy, perhaps even more remarkable. So, if I were anybody in Rangoon, I would take objection to your statement. Okay, the second one is about Balasubramanian's thing about Teesta River. I think there had been some discussions earlier sometime this year in March or April about Bangladesh allowing the Chinese access to Teesta River. I think it has perhaps not succeeded. I think there is a hiatus on this, and that keeping India's proclivities in mind, I think it perhaps Bangladesh will not be in a position to proceed further with this permission. I hope I have been able to address the apprehensions of both my colleagues.
We are already overshot, sir, so please keep it brief.
Yeah.
And only a question, not a comment. Comment will postpone it to tomorrow. Comment is tomorrow. Question is today. Keep it closer. Only a question.
My comment is the program or the question that I want. The comment is out there, I don't know.
Tomorrow, sir. We are already overshot, so we'll take it tomorrow.
Why did you ask the questions?
Ask the question.
Not a comment, but ask the question.
Yes, Just ask the questions of my
Few weeks before the final talks for independence with England, Aung San was Jawaharlal Nehru's guest. He was wearing a suit. It can fit in only for summer. And Nehru told him, it's extremely cold in London. You don't have any wind. He took his overcoat and put it on him. Then he ordered 3 suits for Aung San. And Aung San later on said that it was these suits which enabled him to withstand the extreme winter in London. Aung San Suu Kyi, during the Jawaharlal Nehru, after he received the Jawaharlal Nehru Award, spoke in Vigyan Bhavan, where she referred to this, how close the leaders were. As a result of it, Vernon Levy, the well-known British author, said, Burma is a province of India. Continued during Hunu's time, Aung San. And then Aung San Suu Kyi, with deep anguish, mentioned about the agreement that our military entered with the Sri Lankan military, and our support to democratic movement came down. And she added, this is a government-to-government relation I count, but there is people-to-people relation. And these people-to-people relation are always been good to us. I was with the University of Madras at that time, and mine was the only department which held a seminar.
What's your question, sir?
To protest it. I am coming. Aung San Suu Kyi then referred to the military relations. Secretary West Ganapati, who did not come here, he said he was holding his head in a state of anguish, head down in a state of anguish. And she said about the betrayal of India to the democratic movement that is taking. Now, why did we betray? It goes against Gandhi's legacy, goes against Nehru's legacy. It goes against the legacy of all that we stood for. What is your view? Do you subscribe to the agreement between the military on the both sides and letting down the democratic movement?
My view is very simple. If the military is in power and the power is unlimited in Myanmar, where there is no other alternative, you have to go with the government. I think that has been what we have been doing in the past. It will continue in the present till such time there is no transition to civilian rule. The second item is, this has been the constant policy of the government of India over the last 30, 40 years. It will continue to be there because I think as far as the government is concerned, you have to talk to the people who are in power. But the government of India has not neglected the other stakeholders. Aung San Suu Kyi being unhappy with the military to military relationship is a different thing. In 1992, when at the behest of the former President Narayanan, when she was given the JLN Peace Award, it set India relationship back by 10 years. That Aung San Suu Kyi does not bear in mind. India gave refuge to 30 MPs elect of the 1990 elections. We had over 1 lakh Burmese refugees on our border. What happened to all those people? Did Aung San Suu Kyi take all this into our account when she said India should not have military to military relationship? So I think we are looking at politics in this particular thing because she was trying to express her anguish. But people who have been to that country, served there, understand that anguish is understandable, but what she said may not have been the correct thing to say.
No, sir. With your permission, no more. Thank you, because already overshot. We have another session tomorrow. I'll be most welcome to have you here tomorrow. And so all that remains for me is to thank these wonderful speakers. Please join me in applauding their wonderful effort. Yogesh, all yours.
I thank the chair and the esteemed speakers for for successfully completing the last session of the day. I would also like to thank the chair and the speakers for those engaging and educational presentations. I'm sure it was a long yet rewarding session for all. I thank the promoters for having moderated this session so effectively. I thank the members in the audience for actively participating in the Q&A session. Before we conclude, I request the chair, Commodore Vasan, to felicitate the distinguished speakers.
Hope he survives in Bangalore. Thank you, sir. I think so. Thank you so much.
Before we draw the first day of the conference to a close, I would like to inform everyone that it is being planned to release the papers presented in this conference as a joint publication. Therefore, we request all the paper presenters to make any edits as needed and submit their manuscripts by the 30th of August. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we conclude the first day of the two-day national conference on Xi Jinping's third term, implications for global order and India.